powered by Sports Fluent. I'm Anthony Kay, and this week I have a very special guest, Natasha Sokolovsky. How are you? She's from Dominion. She's a mortgage broker, with Dominion Lending, and we're going to talk about mortgages and more. Natasha, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excited because being in Toronto and seeing the housing market and how crazy it has gotten, any mortgage advice that you can give us is going to be very, very helpful. And I know that, and I'm quoting you here.
Mhm.
So for those of you that know that I don't cuss, I'm going to say this. You essentially get shit done for
I do.
people, helping them with their mortgages. So I think I get 3 of those in every episode. So there's one.
Okay.
You can have the other 2.
Okay.
So, so
Me.
first of all, how did you get into, we're going to start with that. How'd you get into being kind of a mortgage agent, and specifically who do you work with? And then we'll get into kind of the really deep dive questions.
All the like tips and tricks and
Yeah,
everything.
absolutely. And we got to
Okay.
make people more fluent, right? So,
Gotta make them more fluent all due time. So I'm new to the mortgage industry, which may surprise people, but I worked in the public sector and still do for the past 10 years. Currently, I manage by law enforcement officers. And it was an interesting time in my life where I wasn't happy. I used to work for children's services and I wasn't fully happy in the position that I was in. And so instead of letting my external circumstances really dictate my path, I just decided to pivot. And so I switched divisions, started working in bylaw, and I had someone come into my life who worked at Dominion Lending Center and basically recommended that I become a mortgage agent. And I was really surprised. Like, I never thought to be a mortgage agent. And it was just funny because when I bought my first investment property, I remember going through the process with the mortgage agent and just thinking in my head, like, oh, I would change this or I would streamline this. And it was percolating in my mind. And then this person just randomly came into my life, saw it as an opportunity. So I just studied, wrote the exam, and then jumped in. Like, I literally jumped in with both feet, just betting on myself, and just entered in this like crazy world of mortgages.
you talk about crazy. Um, the housing market, specifically in Canada, obviously Toronto, Vancouver being the 2 biggest of the bunch, housing prices have skyrocketed. Great for us who owned homes, but not so
Yeah.
great if you're just trying to get into the market, or heck, if you want to upgrade to something. Heck, some people want to downgrade. It's going to cost
Yeah.
them more to downgrade than it did to buy the home that they're in. So how did we get here? How did the housing market skyrocket so much in Toronto or in
Well,
Canada? Let's go, or
well,
whichever
we'll
one. We
just
can
go
go
with
both.
Canada.
Yeah, just Canada. Yeah.
I think we can all agree we're in an inflationary environment right now. We feel it, you go to the gas station, you're pumping gas, or you're going to the grocery store, you're buying food. Like, everything is so expensive right now. That's just the reality of life right now. And so really the government is caught between, I would say, a rock and a hard place. And typically in their toolkit to reduce inflation is to increase interest rates. But they haven't done that because it's just going to worsen the growth and the unemployment challenges that we have right now. And, I don't know if you've seen articles, but right now, our unemployment rate, we have about over 1 million jobs to fill. So there are excessive amount of unemployment challenges. And so we're in this world where interest rates have never been this low. And I'm talking even right now. I saw a variable interest rate at 0.85%. So
I'll
when you
take it.
look at, I
No.
know, but I don't want everyone to quote me and then
Yeah,
go off
I
on
know
one.
it fluctuates. Yes,
I
yeah.
need this. I need this. But there are products that are extremely low right now. Not to say that everyone would qualify for it, but you look at these rates and you just think, oh my goodness, these lenders are basically giving money for free. That's really what it comes down to. And so when you see interest rates at rock bottom lows, what kind of environment does that cultivate? You have people obviously looking at their situation and they're going to leverage debt. They're not going to
Sure.
want to hold cash. They're going to take on more mortgages. They're going to look at refinancing their properties and pulling out equity. And so we got ourselves into this, I would say, environment where a lot of people just started to jump right into our housing sector. And what happens? It caused housing prices to skyrocket. And they did skyrocket.
So let me ask you a question. We're going to get to the interest rates, I think, in a couple of minutes, but I want to specifically ask this because I was living in the US right before, I call it a depression. Everybody else called it a recession, but let me tell you, we were all very depressed. And so when there was that bubble that we, I want to say it was whatever, 07, 08, 09, kind of that time. And the bubble burst. And I mean, there were houses. I remember I was living in Arizona at the time. And there were houses that were going for 500,000-600,000 that were selling for 30,000.
Wow.
Like there was that bubble went like pop. Are we in that situation where we're in a housing bubble? Like, are we in a housing bubble? Let's start there. There's probably more to that, but do you feel that we're in a housing bubble?
I totally feel like we're in a housing bubble. And it interests me because I love using social media and putting polls out there. And I did put out a poll and asked people, do you think we're in a housing bubble? Yes or no? And by saying no, you're basically saying these housing prices are our new norm. And it really surprised me that majority of the people do not think we're in a housing bubble. And for someone like myself, like I'm looking at this situation and you really see a psychology at play. And I think this is something that's really a Canadian thing where people believe the only direction for housing prices in Canada is to just move up. They never think that they're going to go down, which I find very interesting. But I don't blame them because I know for the past 15 years, the news always has all these articles. Oh, the real estate market's going to crash. Oh, this is what's going to happen. And then it never happens.
Right.
So because it never happens, people are always under the impression that real estate is a safe investment and my housing prices are just going to continue to go up. But I think to answer your question, yes, we're in a housing bubble. But the reason why I say we're in a bubble is you have to really look at how quickly houses have risen over the past couple of years. And I think we can all agree, having these increases of like 20 to 30% each year, that's really unsustainable. We're not going to be seeing this long term. Now, how long this bubble is going to persist, I'm not sure. I think there's a couple factors that we need to really look at. And one major one would be this new COVID variant. And it kind of has me nervous because you think if we have to go through another potential lockdown, what does that mean? Like, does that mean
we're all going to need bigger houses because we're going to need our own, everyone's going to really need their own space if we have to do this again.
Oh, I hope not. But then you think, oh my goodness, are they going to create more government assistance programs? Are more people going to lose their jobs? Does that mean, these interest rate hikes that the Bank of Canada is telling us is going to essentially happen is not going to be happening next year? So we're just going to have this crazy inflationary environment with super low interest rates. Like, I think, this COVID variant makes me nervous. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But to think positively, to say, hey, we're not going to enter in another lockdown and that the government will hopefully realize that's not a solution to dealing with the variant is that I just think the moment we start seeing interest rates go up, then you're going to start to see the correction starting to happen. And I know.
Can I pause you for a second there? Because I want to go back because I don't want to get away from the burst.
Okay.
Because I've seen the housing market burst and what happens. Like it was really bad. Obviously, people know if they think back to there. So I want to just ask you before we move on. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you that we're in a bubble. And I understand why people don't believe it because it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. We keep saying, okay, it's going to come. Oh, the burst is coming. And then it doesn't. So eventually it falls on deaf ears. So in your opinion, and I know you kind of said you don't know when, but if you had to make a prediction, mm-hmm. when will it burst?
Well, I think it's going to burst next year. And if I had to make a prediction, I'm going to say, and what I mean by burst, because I know you brought up the example in the US.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be complete, fall. Yeah.
I feel like the way that we lend in Canada is very different from the US. Like the US, it's very easy to get a mortgage.
Can I tell you my example? What happened?
Tell me.
Right. So right before that, so I moved down there, I want to say I moved there in 05. So it was before this was a thing, obviously. And so I have good credit in Canada, but I have no credit when I move to the US.
Yeah.
I get all my paperwork, of course, I'm there legitimately. And when I go to buy my house, they say, great, based on your kind of credit score in Canada and what you have,
Yeah.
your employment that you have secured here, et cetera, we're going to give you 100% mortgage,
What?
interest only,
Stop.
with an additional 20% on a variable arm so that you can buy other things that you need, be it furniture, a car, whatever you need. And I say, no, thank you. My dad said you got to put this much down and do this and this and this, and I'd rather go with that. And the interest rate was still very low.
Yeah.
So I got it mine the right way. I call it right. I had the money, I put it down, I did it the right way.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. Talking to my neighbors, they took advantage of 100% interest only at 2% or 2.5, whatever it was really low. The problem and then now fast forward a few years.
Yeah.
Well, now it's 6% is the interest. The interest only portion was on a timer, was 24 months. So the 2 years expires. Now you have to go from 2% interest only, right, to 6% principal plus interest. So now your payments are 10 times higher. But here's the worst part. They all bought 3 or 4 houses on that same plan and made them investment properties. But so now they're paying $1,500 for 3 houses. Oh, wait, now I got to pay $15,000 for 3 houses. Forget it. And they just foreclose on all 3. So that's what I saw happen a lot there. So I know so I just want to give that example. So when people say we lend differently, we don't do that here. we don't do that.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah, clearly it was a bad idea. Yes.
Oh my goodness. No, and that's the beautiful part about Canada is that I know it sucks the way that we lend. It does not make it easy to get into the housing market. But when you think about, even if we start to see prices go down and interest rates are eventually going to go up, at the end of the day, to get a mortgage in Canada, you still got to qualify at 5.25%, right? Regardless if you're only having to pay an interest rate of like 2%. So I think there's just a lot of stability here, which is really great because it allows Canadians to just kind of plan ahead and not feel the pressures like what you just said.
Well, okay. So you're planning ahead, but I didn't even know this was a thing until obviously our market skyrocketed. So I think they're called monster mortgages. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the mortgage debt is growing, right? Obviously, because the housing prices are growing, so there's more debt.
Yeah.
So, is there regulations coming? Is there things that are going to change in 2022 that are going to protect us from that? Because again, prices go up. Well, now you got to mortgage more. Now you're kind of that mortgage debt, I think, is growing at a pretty fast rate. Maybe really, you probably know better than I do. What's happening?
I think to kind of rewind a bit, like now, Canadian real estate market is valued at 6.1 trillion. So that's pretty huge. That's 3 times the output of our economy. And when you start to like break it down by province, and I know you said Vancouver, so obviously Ontario and BC are the driving forces, and really Ontario's the bulk of the value. Ontario's at about 2.8 trillion. So really Ontario's probably the most overpriced real estate in our country right now. And so if you look from like a lender's perspective, right? Most of the mortgages that lenders have, their portfolios are centered around Ontario and BC. And what I think is absolutely fascinating is that back in 2016, 47% of the type of mortgages that were basically out there were insured mortgages. So really, that's like no risk to the lenders because the insurers would take a hit. But now, like this year, only 26% of mortgages are insured and the rest are just conventional uninsured mortgages, which I thought that was really interesting because that means the lenders are putting themselves
taking that risk,
are in a lot more of a riskier situation should people default on their mortgage. Now, I know mortgage delinquencies are at a record low. And I think both of us can agree that it's not surprising, right? There was
No,
a
if
government
you got to pay for
support.
something, yeah, that's what you figure out a way to pay is the house. I makes sense.
Exactly. There's government
Yeah,
support, or you could have deferred your mortgage. So it's like,
right.
okay, of course we were at a record low. But as time goes on, what's going to happen? And that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And I think depending on how that plays out, that's probably going to cause lenders to really look at how they lend and maybe do some regulation changes. Because another interesting thing that's happening right now is that Canadians have borrowed over 270 billion in their home equity line of credit. So HELOCs are just rising at a record pace. At I think it was in September, they're at 270.2 billion. So that went up about 1.7 billion from August.
Billion, yes, with a B, right?
Billion,
Yeah, with a
billion,
B.
B. So people are really hedging themselves and taking on a lot of debt. So I think lenders are definitely at risk. And, I think we can all speculate what kind of regulations would come down the pipeline. And I think you see around the world what other countries are doing. And it would be interesting if Canada would adopt some of those measures. Like I
Can
know
you
a
give
lot.
us can you give us an example or two? Like
Yeah,
what?
like I'm thinking, and like I know, like a country like New Zealand, for instance, you can't buy a secondary property using your HELOC. They're looking at exploring that, which I thought is pretty interesting because I would say the trend in Canada is people use their primary residence, refinance, pull the equity, and put it into another property. We
Yeah.
tend to do that here. Um, you could also just see when it comes to secondary properties, banks may require a larger down payment, right?
Yeah.
To offset their risk. Or who knows, maybe they'll increase the stress test. Maybe it'll be higher than 5.25, which
Is it
I
is the
hope
stress
not.
test? I've heard this a lot. So correct. Is our stress test not already kind of tough?
I think so.
That's what I thought. Okay, I just want to make sure. That's what I heard. That's why you're here, is help me be more fluent. So it is already tough, and you think they could make it tougher?
Hey, if they want to, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think there's a possibility. And I don't know if maybe if they'll do it like a tiered system. I'm not sure, but there's always ways of making it a bit more challenging. And I think, increasing the stress test may be an option. But I find when it comes to the stress test, it's interesting because you only have a certain allotment of people that are able to qualify for A mortgages now. And so that's really opening up the doors for people to fill the gaps. And you're starting to see people utilize more B lenders, private
right.
lenders. And so you just see this trend that we're really starting to move away from the big banks, and you're starting to have people utilize mortgage agents more. I know my parents, they never used a mortgage agent. Like you get your mortgage where you banked.
Yeah, you
Like
go to
you
you go to the
go there.
bank and you go into that back office there, and all right.
Exactly.
So you mentioned something a few times, and the reason I pushed it off is because I wanted to save it for one of the last things that we talked about, because this is the one that actually worries me the most,
Okay.
because I lived through it and I saw what happens when the
Tell me.
interest rate goes up. So you
Yeah.
had mentioned the Bank of Canada proposed interest rate hikes over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Obviously, you got $1 million mortgage, and even the smallest increase, half a point is going to make a huge difference on your mortgage. So what have you heard? Obviously we know that nothing's for sure, but what have you
Yeah.
heard? What do you think are those proposed kind of interest rates, and how will that affect? Do you think delinquency goes up? Do you think, what do you think happens with that interest, if it goes, that interest hike, if it happens?
Well, I wouldn't say if it happens,
Okay,
it will.
when it happens?
It's
Yeah.
totally going to happen. Everyone, interest rates are going to go up. I hate to break it to you, but they will go up.
I really like zero. Can we just zero keep that? No.
The good thing is, sometimes I have clients ask me, are they going to skyrocket? What does it mean when they go up? They're not going to go from, 2% to 20%, what we saw in like the 1980s. It doesn't
Right.
work that.
Yes, because
And
that's what
so,
my parents are worried about, or they keep telling me
oh,
about. They always tell, back in the
remember the day?
1980s, I paid 22%. And I'm like, yeah, but your house was $30,000. But anyways, that's maybe a conversation for another day. But yeah, I hear that a lot. I always, so okay, that not gonna happen.
Not going to happen. I hear that a lot too. And I think if you just look at the Bank of Canada and how they increase interest rates, they go up, I would say, either by 0.25 or zero point 0.5. That's
Okay.
usually how the rate hikes happen. So I think when it comes to interest rates, like there's a lot of speculation out there. And I always tell my clients, always plan for the worst case scenario. This way, if it happens, you're good. If it doesn't happen, you're ahead of the game,
Right.
right?
Good advice.
So I would say worst case scenario, they're saying there's going to be about 8 rate hikes. Okay. So if there's 8, that means potentially over the next couple of years, interest rates could be at around, I would say, 4%. So if you know that they're going to be around that amount, what I'm saying to my clients, and everyone has their own tolerance to risk, right? And everyone's going to view things differently. And I think it's really dependent on the person and what their goals are. But I prefer variable mortgage products. I find they outperform fixed majority of the time. I find you're better off taking that lower interest rate and having more money applied to principal than interest than just locking yourself into a fixed product. And then you're subjected to really high penalties if you need to break it.
Right.
And I always say to them, life's variable, so should your mortgage. Like you can't plan for
Okay.
things to happen, right? Like, you could have a death in the family, you get a new job, you got to move, like life happens. And I think, COVID taught us that as well. Like
Right.
things happen, you got to pivot. And so when it comes to variable mortgages, what I tell my clients to do is, okay, if your variable mortgage is say 1.45%, if I was to lock you into a fixed at 2.45%, that difference in payments, you should be putting aside in another bank account every month so that you're saving that money. This way you're building up a cushion.
Right.
So that this way, if you're still, like, say we don't have rate hikes until, I don't know, next November, going up 1.45 up to 0.25, that would bring you to 1.70. You're still outperforming a fixed
Right.
rate. So you're
Yeah.
still having more money going towards principal. You're saving the difference. So you're building your cushion so that, eventually, if you get to a point where you're above, say, 2.45, you have this little savings account that you can pull from. So you're not impacting your monthly cash flow. Or if we don't get to a point where we have these increases in rates that, the bank, like everyone's speculating, you just saved yourself a lot of money and it's in your pocket, not the bank's. And I think people need to really look at that. And all that it comes down to, and I say this acronym all the time, it's just the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. You just got to plan ahead.
Right.
That's really all that it comes down to. So, we're in an inflationary environment. We know rates are going to increase. Those who take the time and put money aside each month are going to be ahead of the game. And these are for people now also. Hey, all those fixed mortgage holders, this applies to you because guess what? In a couple years, when your term is up for renewal, you're going to be renewing at a higher interest rate than what you currently have.
Right. So is that, so to kind of recap, then the best way to kind of inflation proof your mortgage is to kind of assume it's the worst case scenario 2 years from now and take that difference, that extra, and put that aside. Because there was one of the things I wanted to ask you, which was how can you protect yourself from the proposed rate hikes? And I would have thought you would have said, well, lock yourself into a fixed rate because then you know what you're paying for the next 5 years. And you said, of course, the complete opposite, which is why you do what you do and I do what I do. So that's, again, do I go back to that same kind of philosophy? That's how I kind of protect myself from rate hikes, is just assume that I'm already paying the higher rate and build that kind of cushion for when it inevitably does go up.
I think so. I always say to people, failing to plan is planning to fail. So I think that's the
Good
beautiful
one.
part working with
Yeah.
a mortgage agent, right? Because we can like sit down, get you the best product that's going to give you the least amount of penalties. Like you can't just focus on an interest rate. You know, an interest rate is one facet of the product. And I find it really interesting how a lot of clients really focus on that interest rate. It's like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
We got to look at what are the prepayment privileges? What are the penalties that you may have to pay? Those need to come into fact, like you need to factor those in as well. So I just think the beautiful part with working with mortgage agents is they educate you and you can develop a plan. And like that's what it really comes down to. We like, and I know I can speak to all mortgage agents, like you really focus on the client. Like we don't care about the banks. We work with like 50 plus lenders. Our main focus is helping out clients and taking that client centered approach.
Right.
So, you know, everyone's tolerance to risk is different. And I'm not trying to say fixed mortgage rates are bad.
No, but you're just saying based on what you're seeing that's going to happen in the next couple of years, this is the best route for what you would recommend. But each individual is going to, I'm taking the words out of your mouth. Each individual is going to have to create their own plan. And it's a lot easier to do it with someone who knows what they're talking about.
Exactly. And
Okay.
it's funny because I'm sure you hear this too with like artificial intelligence and all this automation. Like I get talks from people and they'll ask me like, aren't you afraid that you're not going to have a job anymore because people are just going to go on a website and get a mortgage? And I'm just like, no, because like we humans, we love to talk and banter and like really talk things out. We're like emotional people. And I think when it comes to your biggest purchase, like you really want someone holding your hand through the process, and a computer algorithm is not going to do that.
Right. Yeah, it might help with adjustments and those other things, but you still need to add that kind of human element to it. I absolutely agree. You have educated us, by the way, so thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go, because everyone's now going to want to get more, I'm sure, have more questions for you, get some advice, and maybe have you as their mortgage advisor. How can people find you? Where can they get a hold of you?
So I would say the best way to get a hold of me would be on Instagram. So you can find me at Mortgages by Tash.
Mortgages by Tash on Instagram. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram too. If you're there, it's sports_fluent. This has been The Fluent, where we bring you more than just sports. Natasha, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.